I'm going to talk about the Secure Pork Supply Project, which is an effort to develop plans on how we would respond to an outbreak of foreign animal disease to minimize that consequence that Dermot is talking about. And by minimize, it's not going to go down to zero, but how we can deal with that. Part of the reason that we're so vulnerable, that the animal agriculture industry in the U.S., is that it's so efficient. The size, structure, efficiency, and extensive movement, especially the extensive movement, inherent in the U.S. and North American livestock industries will present unprecedented challenges in the event of a foot and mouth disease outbreak or other foreign animal disease. Foot and mouth disease is the most dramatic one. The last time we had foot and mouth disease was 1929, and the U.S. was able to stamp it out. But in 1929, there wasn't much movement at all, and it was a lot of small farms with only a few animals, so stamping out was possible. With the very extensive movement we have, especially in the swine industry and dairy industries, it's going to be very hard to stop movement and stamp it out. So the USDA is revising its plan on how to respond to a foot and mouth disease outbreak. After seeing what happened in the United Kingdom in 2001, South Korea, where they killed a third of all their pigs, and it's going to take a long time to recover, the USDA has changed its plan from stamping out, which is killing everything that's infected or might be infected as quickly as you can, to other plans. And we don't have time to go into a lot of details on those plans. But basically, the foot and mouth disease response plan, which is pictured here, says that the first 24 hours of detecting the disease, there would be a standstill in the whole area that is suspected to perhaps be infected. And that will have to be decided at the time. And then in the next 24 hours, they want to institute the continuity of business plans, secure milk supply and secure pork supply. And that's what it says in the FMD response plan, but we haven't got these secure business plans fully developed yet, and that's what we're working on. We're also working on a secure egg supply and secure turkey supply in the event of avian influenza. So in a foreign animal disease outbreak, there would be a stop movement. And when you stop movement in the swine industry, it quickly leads to overcrowding condition because we need to keep the pig flow going. You can't just shut that off. And that presents serious animal welfare issues and health issues. So either you move them or you get to the point where you're having to do euthanasia based on welfare and lack of space. And in the swine industry, I think it's estimated that any given day there are 625,000 pigs on the road. So how do you stop? What do you do with those pigs if you stop them? So it just isn't feasible to have an effective stop movement. So the USDA now has made these statements, their goals for an FMD response. Number one is to detect, control, and contain FMD in animals as quickly as possible. And that used to be the only goal. To eradicate FMD using strategies that seek to stabilize animal agriculture, the food supply, the economy, and protect public health. And just stamping out probably won't accomplish that, so we have to have other plans. And provide science and risk-based approaches and systems to facilitate continuity of business for non-infected animals and non-contaminated animal products. And at the bottom there you'll see it says, achieving these three goals will allow individual livestock facilities, states, tribes, regions, and industries to resume normal production as quickly as possible. Still probably won't be real quick. They will also allow the U.S. to regain FMD-free status without the response effort causing more disruption and damage than the disease outbreak itself. And that's what happened in the UK and in South Korea. The response actually ended up perhaps causing more damage than the actual disease. The disease causes plenty of damage on its own. So this Secure Pork Supply Plan project is funded by USDA, and the initial focus is to develop procedures to allow the safe movement of animals with no evidence of infection. You can't move animals that are infected in a foreign animal disease control zone to a pork processing plant or to other sites to accommodate different stages of production. So we're just focusing on pig movement. There are a lot of other things that need to be considered, but the first thing we're focusing on is pig movement. This involves a lot of people. There's an advisory committee for the Secure Pork Supply Plan. It involves federal and state officials who are responsible for making the decisions during an outbreak, representatives of all phases of the swine industry, National Pork Board, NPPC, and American Association of Swine Veterinarians are involved, swine disease experts, swine production experts. And as we get the plan further developed, we'll invite representatives of other interested commodity groups, because as Dermot just showed, other commodity groups have a stake in this also. So once we have a plan developed, the dairy and beef industries need to understand that plan and agree with it, and the swine industry needs to understand the plan for dairy and beef, because we're all in the same boat. So the proposed approach is premises registration and animal ID, which is essential to track the outbreak. We need prem registration. The swine industry is doing very well there. Dairy, sort of, beef, not so much, getting their premises ID'd. And biosecurity standards. We're developing biosecurity standards that are recommended to be implemented before an outbreak, and then higher biosecurity recommended in the event of an outbreak to keep the disease from getting onto the premises. We need active and passive surveillance looking for these diseases ahead of the outbreak, and then during the outbreak we need very extensive surveillance. OIE compartmentalization. OIE is the World Organization for Animal Health, and that's the organization that sets the rules for trade. And that's why under the WTO, World Trade Organization, if a country has FMD, you don't have to accept their product. And under the World Trade Organization, you can refuse product from any country with FMD. And we do that for all countries that have FMD. And as Dermot says, we would expect other countries to do the same if we get FMD. Compartmentalization is a plan approved by the OIE whereby an integrated industry can prove that they have such excellent biosecurity and surveillance that even in an outbreak, they're pre-approved to continue to export. And that's a goal that we have, but it's a very lofty goal. Nobody in the world's ever achieved it, but we're going to investigate whether that might be a possibility so that at least some of the pork could be exported so that it wouldn't all have to be kept in the U.S. USDA monitored premises is a designation that if you want to move your pigs under this plan, you have to become a monitored premises. And there are definitions for that too, but basically, especially biosecurity and surveillance, to show that you're negative, and then you can move your animals to slaughter or to another production site. And there would be a pre-outbreak component. If a pork producer wants to participate in this ahead of the outbreak, it's voluntary to institute some surveillance and biosecurity and Prem ID. Then in the event of an outbreak, they can much more quickly become a monitored premises to move their animals. And these things are all being defined right now. They aren't fully defined. We had our first meeting of the advisory committee last October. We formed 7 different working groups to start working on each of these individual topics. And we decided to include 4 foreign animal diseases. Foot and mouth disease is the #1 big concern because it's highly infectious and it affects all cloven-hoofed animals, animals with 2 toes. Swine, cattle, sheep, goats, deer, feral swine, a huge problem as Dermot mentioned. The other 3 diseases, classical swine fever, also called hog cholera, swine vesicular disease, which looks like foot and mouth disease but isn't as severe, and African swine fever. So we decided we might as well develop the plan for all 4 of these diseases. They would all have a big impact on the swine industry. And these diseases have a few things in common. First of all, they're not zoonotic, which means they don't infect people. So unlike swine flu, we don't have a human health issue. There needs to be a big effort to convince the general public of that in the event of an outbreak. But they are not an infection risk for people. And they're spread primarily by direct contact and oral exposure. Those are the most important routes for pigs. And pigs are relatively resistant to airborne. Cattle are much more susceptible to airborne. So with that biosecurity profile, you have a better chance of keeping it out of your herd. If you control contaminated objects and feed from entering your swine facility, you have a better chance of keeping this out of your herd. Indirect contact through fomites, dirty trucks and so forth, dirty feed trucks, can also transmit. A concern with pigs is that they exhale very large concentrations of foot and mouth disease virus. So an infected pig exhales very high concentrations compared to cattle and the other species. And cattle are highly susceptible to aerosol. So having infected pigs near cattle is a big problem for the cattle industry. So we would have to be aware of that, and the cattle industry is going to be very interested in this plan. There are vaccines for foot and mouth disease and hog cholera, classical swine fever, but we don't manufacture any of those vaccines in the U.S., and we don't have nearly enough in stockpiles to even begin to have an effective vaccination program in the event of an outbreak. So vaccine will not be immediately available or will be in short supply if it's a very big outbreak at all. In a small outbreak, we wouldn't vaccinate. We would focus on controlling it and stamping it out. In a big outbreak, we would need to implement vaccination on a large scale very rapidly, but currently we don't have enough vaccine. African swine fever and swine vesicular disease, no vaccine exists anywhere in the world. African swine fever is causing big problems now in Asia, Russia and some other countries in Asia, and Europe is threatened with the introduction of African swine fever. And there's a lot of concern it could get to the U.S. But nobody has a vaccine, and there's an intensified research effort now to develop a vaccine. So vaccination isn't going to be a viable option in a large outbreak, at least initially. It might be used for ring vaccination or in certain high-value animals. Somebody's going to have to decide who gets the little bit of vaccine we have. So the tools to control foreign animal disease outbreak, any foreign animal disease. It's stop movement, and we've already discussed that's pretty hard to accomplish. Biosecurity, stamping out, slaughter of all clinically affected and in-contact susceptible animals very quickly, within 24 hours. And if it's a very large outbreak, we just physically cannot do that and probably don't want to do that because we would be killing way too many animals, and then you have to dispose of all those animals. Trace back and trace forward. When you find an infected premises, farm, you want to know where that disease came from. So you trace back all of their contacts for the last 2 incubation periods, which is 28 days. So everything that came onto that farm, what might have brought it on. And then you go to that origin and find out if that farm is also infected, or that premises. And trace forward any animals that left the infected farm, where did they go? Because they probably spread the disease to that premises also. We're going to need rapid diagnostics. And rapid diagnostics exist, but they, with PCR, which is very good technology, but it needs to be ramped up, and we're going to need very extensive, large-scale diagnostic capabilities. And vaccination is a very important tool, but again, it's only for foot and mouth disease and classical swine fever, and we probably won't have enough, at least initially, in an outbreak. And there are plans to vaccinate to kill. All of the if you can get rid of the disease, you kill all of the vaccinated animals, they could go to slaughter, and then you can get freedom from disease without vaccination. And that's what we want, to have the best trade status. If we vaccinate and control the disease, you can continue vaccinating and get freedom from disease with vaccination, but a lot of countries still won't accept your meat if you're vaccinating because it might be hiding the disease. And if we have freedom with vaccination, we're going to need very extensive surveillance to prove that even though they're vaccinated, they aren't carrying the virus, so that we can get our trade back. So really the only good tool we have in a large outbreak of one of these foreign animal diseases is biosecurity. And that'll be the responsibility of each producer to make sure they have the biosecurity to keep their animals from becoming infected so that they can gain monitored premises status and move their animals. So biosecurity is going to be paramount. So we're working on biosecurity standards. We want to have them defined ahead of an outbreak. Premises can voluntarily, probably we're going to have level 1 and level 2 biosecurity, level 1 before the outbreak, and premises can voluntarily implement level 1 so that they can more rapidly become a monitored premises to move their animals and be ready to implement level 2 biosecurity in the event of an outbreak. And again, that's voluntary. And ahead of the outbreak, we need to enhance our surveillance capacity and capabilities, and that's being discussed now, how that can occur, how expensive will it be, who's going to pay for it. It could be part of comprehensive swine surveillance, that's the hope. There's a got tonsils program for classical swine fever, and maybe that could be expanded. Oral fluid sampling is a technology that's very, very promising as a simple and effective way to collect samples for surveillance. And then during an outbreak, there's going to need to be very extensive diagnostic testing. And probably before animals can move, they're going to have to be tested within 24 hours of movement by PCR to show that the herd is negative. In order to be ready to do that, within 24 hours of an outbreak, we have to ramp up surveillance ahead of the outbreak, so our diagnostic labs are running these tests routinely and have the capacity to ramp up quickly. And then it's going to be a very extensive data management issue so that the people running the response have information on all of these premises. Who's infected, who's a dangerous contact premises, who's vaccinated, who has had a test within 24 hours so they can move their animals quickly. So it's a really big data management logistics problem.